InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts. In today's podcast, we interview Steve Gutterman, the CEO of Falcon Brands, California's proprietary premier house of brands, where we discussed in some detail some of Falcon's premier brands such as Crew, Grand Cru, and High Garden, how the company has solidified its dominant leadership position in today's California market, as well as how Falcon plans to stay ahead of the competition moving forward. Okay, so today I'm speaking with Steve Gutterman, who is the CEO of Falcon Brands. Steve, it's great to be able to talk to you today. So for any of our listeners who might be unfamiliar with you and your company, can you maybe just give a brief background of Falcon Brands as well as sort of your role within the cannabis space?
Absolutely. Well, just starting with me, I've been in the cannabis space for about 4 years. I've been involved in growth companies and growth industries for about 25. So with E-Trade for a long time, it's partner of a private equity firm. And then I also was the president of Harvest and helped take the company public. And it was in that context that I was first introduced to Falcon. Falcon is one of the largest cannabis companies in California. And it grew, when I say largest, what I mean is we grew from 0 to 100 million in really our first year of full operations. Wow. And so Falcon right now produces 3 of the top 10 selling brands in California. It is a company that has the beginnings of being vertically integrated. We have a little bit of cultivation that we use for our own products. We then are one of the largest manufacturers and producers of products for the state. We're one of the largest distributors in the state of California, although we only distribute our own products. We through a different entity and a different name, we have one retail store. And so, we've really made great inroads into the California market. Customers really love our products. They really resonate. And I think that the thing that has always interested me in Falcon and investors in Falcon and customers in Falcon products is that it's one of the very few companies in cannabis that melds this kind of authentic OG street cred where people are literally tattooing our brands to their bodies, and melds that with this kind of world-class professionalism where we have people from Pepsi and Ford and Black & Decker and Nordstrom's and Kohl's, and those people are managing the processes that get down to kind of a Six Sigma level of precision. And so there's not many companies that in cannabis that merge those two things. And that's been a real recipe for our success.
So obviously you've sort of answered kind of my first question, which is what do you attest your guys' growth as well as brand recognition to? But could you maybe go into a little bit more details about what specifically have you noticed as far as the biggest factors that have attributed to the most traction for your brands? Because when you look at the cannabis space, it's the biggest difficulty. That's what people are fighting for the most, is how do you actually get your brands to maintain in people's minds and actually last the test of time? Because I think there's been a lot of people who have come out of the gates, sort of guns blazing, and then the overall hype wears off, and then that brand just slowly sort of fades amongst the many millions of others because there is new stuff coming out literally on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think there's 2 critically important pieces. The first is you can't fake the funk, meaning you have to produce products that are authentic, that people love. And so the people in our organization that are producing products are people who love the plant and love the product and really understand what people like them or that are different than them, but are, but still love cannabis, what all of those people will love. And so you got to start with that. You got to start with authentic products that people love. And if we ever, or if any company ever gets away from that, you lose, period, full stop. Then on top of that, the other critically important piece is that you got to do all the other little things that cumulatively are not so little. So in other words, if you tell a store that you're going to be at their at their shop at 10 a.m. on a Thursday with a pallet of goods, you better show up at 9:58 to 10 o'clock on Thursday with a pallet of goods. And by the way, I'm not so sure that that should be a thing, but in the cannabis industry, that's a thing.
Very much
and
a thing.
So, yeah, right. And so, by the way, there's no silver bullet there, right? It's not, well, let me tell you, the secret to our success is that we show up at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. It's that we show up at 10 a.m. on a Thursday and we deliver what we say, and the pallet's full of goods that we say that they were. And then we have a good billing system, and we et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we do 100 little operational things correctly. And we do them again because we've got a team that's done it in this industry and other industries. And so when you combine that kind of focus on operational excellence with a real authenticity and passion for the product, you win. And, you know, you bring up a really good point, Taylor. Sorry to go on, but I think this is a really important thing. You're so right. We've seen companies come and go, right? And so we're really one of the only companies in the state that has had products that are consistently in the top 10 and have been in each of the last 3 years. And so, to your point, it's hard to get into the top 10. It's really, really hard to stay in the top 10 like we have. And it's because we have that combination of those two things.
Yeah, that sounds like you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. And, you know, maybe not describe the silver bullet, but it does seem that way, because I would say that for a lot of these companies, that exact, due diligence and consistency is everything that's all it takes for any of these companies to go down, right? Is it just takes 1 month of your product not being on shelves, and then everyone forgets about you. And then suddenly we're on to the next 6 brands. And you went from, you could have been the number 1 brand. Now you're down to 15 or 20. And I've seen that for a lot of these companies. So I do think that that's probably the most valid point you raised there, is that consistency, because seeing that in Canada as well, right? A lot of big producers who couldn't deliver just filling shelves consistently with a product for any period of months. And a lot of those brands now, no traction. And they're really struggling to try to now, it's hard to make up ground. So a big thing that's going on, there's a lot of discussions about California's cannabis market. Obviously, you're seeing the positive side of that, which is it's a robust market. There's a huge population size. Everyone's very well endorsed with it. Can you maybe talk about what is driving the sort of negative press towards the California market, of what the problems are, and also what you're seeing as it's not so bad as well?
Well, first, let's start with the fact that California is the largest cannabis market in the world, right? And it's the largest, most competitive, most sophisticated cannabis market in the world. And that can be daunting, right? I mean, so when you have a bunch of really good companies, not to mention a robust gray market that's a source of competition, and you have high taxes, and you have a regulatory regime that is complex, that it's easy to see why, if you are an MSO, you might want to pick a state that has less competition and kind of a more limited set of competitors. And you think, okay, you know what, if all I need to do in Illinois, right, or a state that there's in Arizona, state that there's limited licensure, all I need to do is put up a dispensary. Doesn't even need to be a particularly good one, but if I get a license and I build it, people will come. And so the problem with that philosophy is that I think that that's a transitory thing. I think California is a model for how cannabis markets will become. Let me give you an example. In 2019, many companies, including Harvest, where I was at the time, paid what I would call a scarcity premium to operate in Florida, right? Because at the time there were 5 super licenses. You remember that, Taylor, right? And that was all well and good until 2021, when the Florida legislature said, we like the revenue from cannabis. We're going to get rid of that concept, and we're going to offer 1,000, 1,500 more retail dispensary licenses. So this thought that limited licensure states will stay static forever, I think, is not consistent with what we've seen in other more mature markets. So to kind of paraphrase the song, if you can make it in California, you can make it anywhere, right? And by the way, that's true not just in cannabis, that's true in any kind of CPG and in most consumer goods. Trends and companies start in California, they then go across the country and really all across the world. So it's really hard to enter into the California market. And I think that's maybe the source of a lot of the trepidation and bad press. But on the other hand, if you are one of the winners in California, as we believe Falcon has been, then that puts you in an awfully good position, not only to continue to expand in this market, that's the biggest one in the world, but really, from here as a springboard into other states as well.
I find that hilarious that's you mentioned the sort of New York song. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, was that that does seem to be what California has created, is the benchmark, where if you can make a brand or anything work successfully within the cannabis industry there, it will probably not be that difficult for you to translate that into less competitive markets and into less aggressive states. And I think that's the very astute point that you sort of raised there, is that is usually what I hear is the big issue with California, is barrier to entry, still really difficult. You're seeing, I think, across the board, no matter what state you're in, there's still complaints about social equity programs. And I don't think that'll ever go away. It's never going to be good enough. I don't believe, and I also don't believe that there's a point in people ever saying that enough is enough. Like we've helped people enough, no more. Doesn't make sense. So I think that those programs will always need to be updated and remodeled, because that's the nature of the world. But yeah, very, very astute point on what's going on in California. So I really appreciate that. When you are looking, I know you've recently commented, I saw you'd recently talked with MJB's Daily about sort of the flower segment of California and how that's sort of evolved. And you mentioned as well, one of the biggest factors I think most people mention with California is the unfair competition with the black market. That's the biggest complaint, is that you could have, possibly down the street, a gray or legacy market store competing with a standard retail store, and they don't have to pay the same taxes. They don't have to deal with the same issues. What has been sort of Falcon's, I guess, other than the things you've already touched on, what have you guys done to help compete more aggressively with the legacy market? And how have you sort of worked, and I know you've sort of mentioned this, that Falcon Brands has sort of brought some of those OG components into Falcon Brands. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, look, our entire focus, like we talked about before, is producing great products for customers. And we're content with that we produce great products for customers. We work very closely with the California regulators who are frequent guests in our facilities, and we've developed really robust relationships with over the course of years. So we work very closely with them to make sure that not only are we following all of the very complex set of rules, but we're also thinking proactively about how those rules could evolve and change. And we work very closely with our regulator friends and partners to make suggestions and really try to be, kind of the example for what a company could and should be. And by the way, that's appropriate given the fact that we're one of the largest cannabis companies in the state. We're one of the largest cannabis taxpayers in the state. We're very proud of that. And so we're content to make great products, work closely with the regulators, and let the chips fall. And as a matter of fact, Taylor, we really look at the black market differently than I think people who from the outside looking in look at it. We look at that as a tremendous opportunity for us, because we think, look, we're selling over $100 million worth of our products right now. And as an industry, there's $6 billion worth of legal products. And there's probably, who knows exactly, but let's call it $10 billion of black market. Well, that number is only going to go down, which means as enforcement gets more robust and comprehensive. So that number is only going to go down, which means the legal number is only going to go up, which means companies like us that are winning in the legal space, it's all upside. So we look at that as, hey, we're doing well now, and there is an opportunity to continue to do better as the market gets bigger.
Absolutely. So when we are looking at maybe specific products or specific trends being noticed within the California market, as you guys, again, are in that sort of top 10 category for most things, what are you noticing as far as consumer trends when it comes to specific strains or specific product categories? Are people's tastes and preferences starting to evolve and change as this industry matures? And how does your team stay on top of that?
Yeah, another really good question. And the answer is absolutely. Customer tastes and preferences continue to evolve. And the trend, not just in California, but in all mature markets, is that as markets continue to operate, customers become more and more sophisticated, right? Which means you got to bring your A game. I know that sounds really cliche, but there's no one answer to your question, right? There are some customers that are willing to pay up for for really high quality flower, or for a vape that tastes great and has amazing terpenes. And then there's some people that are like, that's nice. I actually want bargain basement weed. And so I'm looking for the absolute lowest price. And so you got to really understand each segment. You got to understand what's going to make people in those segments happy. And you got to produce products accordingly. And again, that's very different than what happens in a limited licensure state, where you can kind of throw out a shingle and say, hey, cannabis for sale, and people will come.
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay. For companies like us that spend a lot of time sourcing product, developing product, thinking about the customer segments and exactly what they want and how we can get it to them, that plays into our hands. So the more sophisticated the customer base, the better for a company like Falcon.
When it comes to assessing your in-house product and sort of looking over, obviously, again, your brand consistency, very important. Everything that goes out has to be, sort of at that quality level, or the brand suffers. On your team, do you guys have like a team? I know cannabis sommelier is becoming the term that you're starting to see thrown out there. Is that sort of what you guys have, of sort of a head taster, or and how does that process sort of pan out? How many people need to be involved in assessing a product that's going to be going to, as you mentioned, an array of customer preferences?
Yeah, we actually do two really important things. We do have real experts, call them sommeliers or tasters, and they're integral in the development and the refinement of our products. And then we also, and this is very different than most cannabis companies, we have a robust QC team and testing team. So, and we're testing not just for all of the things that we know can't go into a product, right? So all of the making sure that all of the kind of chemicals or substances that you don't want in a product are not in there. We're not just testing for that. We're testing for quality, right? And we're not afraid to pull products or even destroy products if they don't meet our rigorous internal standards, not just for regulatory and safety compliance, but for quality as well. Because again, that's the bedrock of what we do. And that bond that we've established between us and our customers, and that trust that they give us every day, week, month as they buy our product, that is a bond that we hold very dear and will not break. And so it's for us, everything we do, whether it's having people who love the product, taste and continuously refine what we're doing, or our whole QC team, which comes from companies, like I said, like Ford, we really kind of look at it in a Six Sigma kind of way. both of those things together are critically important to make sure that we continue to validate our customers' trust.
It's good to hear that you're focusing on not just the chemical makeup aspect, but also the legitimate quality, because I do think that that's what you see a lot of right now is people posting their sort of third-party testing stats, talking about, organic soil composition and a lot of these things, but still selling a very average to inferior product, which who cares at the end of the day, how clean it is. It has to be clean. That's not, that's not an above,
that's a table stake. That's exactly right. Yeah,
exactly.
You would never go to, that's exactly right, Taylor, and sorry to interject, but you would never go to a restaurant and go, you know what, the food sucked, but it was clean. Yeah. So I guess I'll go back there.
Very, very accurate. So when we are looking at sort of how California specifically is evolving, as that is sort of the benchmark and very much ahead of the curve because it's the most established market, what are you seeing as far as changes to product categories now? And do you see that changing that rapidly? There's been a lot of discussions about how beverages and edibles still haven't really quite gotten their footing as far as mainstream consumer adoption. And then there's a lot of people seeing that. I know the concentrate and specifically distillate category, the 510 thread distillates you've seen explode over the last couple of years. And I know for most people, the convenience sake of that is kind of what's drawing them. Are there any other product categories or things you're noticing on the horizon that are making you sort of shift your stance?
Well, look, I think that edibles as a category will continue to grow. I think that if you look at kind of the trend over the last 10 years, vapes have grown significantly, and that's and we see continuous and maybe even increasing demand for those. I think that, it's funny, I was on a panel a couple of years ago where some of my fellow panelists were boldly proclaiming that nobody was going to smoke flower in 20. I think it was actually this year. By 2022, no one will smoke. And look, I'm not sure I agreed with that then, and I definitely don't agree with that now, right? And so flower provides a social experience that's hard to replicate. You're smoking the whole plant with all the cannabinoids, and so if you think about every other product, it's really disassembling what's in the plant and then trying to reassemble it in some fashion. So I think that the death, to quote Mark Twain, the death, or maybe not, he didn't quite say this, but the death of flower is greatly exaggerated, right? I think that we see that as even moving into the future, the largest single category. Now, will it go from 55-60% where it is in some states down to maybe a plurality, so it's 40-45, possibly, right? Would we see edibles and vapes continue to increase? Yeah. And then do we have everything else in that kind of 10%? Yeah, probably. I think what the last thing that I'll say, Taylor, is I think that there are a lot of interesting delivery mechanisms that are unique to cannabis. So, for example, I know many companies and people have tried to crack the code on beverages. Partially, I think, because that's the delivery mechanism for alcohol and for things that we just know and like.
It's the restaurant model, so that's...
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great delivery mechanism for cannabis, right? The efficacy is not great. It's bulky. If you own a dispensary, you got to figure out how to store these things. I mean, so it's not necessarily perfect. And so things that are more suited to the delivery of these subatomic cannabinoids, I think are going to continue to be interesting, even though right now they're all niche. If you sell flower, vapes, and edibles, you got 90% of the stuff on stores.
Yeah. When you're looking at flower, are you noticing that there is any sort of overall trends when it comes to specific strains or genetics starting to crowd the market or shift overall? Because I know that that's something we've at least seen in Canada, is there was sort of a big race to get a lot of, I would say, the sort of mainstay genetics onto the market. And then you saw people sort of not receive those super well. And now you're seeing a lot of changes and almost a reversion back to a lot of those old school strains that a lot of people grew up on. Is that something you're noticing in California? Is it just an ever evolving thing, or are there specific trends you're noticing?
I think it's an ever evolving thing. And I think that this again is where it's important to have that authenticity in your product development and have people like we do that are really passionate about the plant. There are many companies, small and large. There are many MSOs that are very reactive, and you know these companies well, Taylor, right? That say, "Oh, it looks like Golden Goat is making a comeback. We better start growing that. We better dust off that strain." And by the time that's said and done, you're 6 months later, and then your growers and your distributors are looking at each other and they have their hands out and they're going, "Huh, I guess we missed that one." So if you're trying to react to the market, you're not going to do well, right? If you have this this passion and this authenticity, and you're always kind of thinking about what would we like as consumers, and plant accordingly, and mesh that with a kind of data-driven approach to what's doing well, both in your grow and in the market, that's when you win.
Very much so. So I guess just in final thoughts, what is sort of the product that comes from Falcon Brands that you are personally the most excited about, or maybe that you use the most?
Well, I mean, I'm a very simple cannabis user. And so for me, it's all about convenience. So I just really, I love our crew disposable vapes. And I know that there are probably some people on our team that are like, "Oh, you are such a simpleton," but it's such a great product. It tastes good. It's a great, it's a great combination of ingredients, and it's not hard to see why it's one of the really most beloved products in the state.
That's very I find that's actually a really common theme amongst a lot of people in the cannabis space, is even a lot of some of the more elaborate sort of grower people who are very immersed in the plant and extremely knowledgeable about everything cannabis, a lot of the time are just like a simple joint guy. And there's and trying to convince them otherwise, like, "Nope, I don't need a bunch of other crazy stuff. Like, I just want it nice and simple." And find you find that trend a lot of the people who are very immersed in this industry. Their tastes tend to range extremely simplistic, and they just are like, "Yeah, just something that it works all the time.
It fits in my pocket," the whole thing, right?
Awesome. And is there, I guess, one last question is, when we're looking at maybe the next year or so, is there anything that investors or consumers should be paying attention to with Falcon Brands specifically, as far as new products coming out, or if you were to look at a potential future state to expand into, what would kind of hold the most interest?
Well, I'm going to give you a two-part answer on that. We are focused on continuing to grow our footprint in California because it's such a massive state and it's so fragmented, and we've already made great inroads, yet there is so much open road in front of us. So that's our number one focus. Number two, we would look at states that have similar characteristics to California, right? And so are geographically proximate, are not limited licensure, where you go in and if you produce a superior set of products and services, you win, right? So we look at Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, those kinds of states. Maybe I'll give you a three-part answer, because the third piece is, while those are our focus number one and focus number two, we feel very confident about our product suite. And so while we are looking at expansion in California and in those geographically proximate similar states, we're also exploring ways to get our products across the country, because we know that customers will love them, and they deserve them.
There you go. Yeah, that is that's the big difficulty with the US market, right? Is it's easy to get into your whatever state you start in. It's really tough to then start expanding outwards because it's a whole new set of regulations, a whole new team you have to start dealing with, a whole new group of people you got to email and call with every state you enter into. And I do know that that can definitely bog things down. When it comes to the idea of federal legalization or any of that, is that something I know a lot of people who are either a multi-state operator or even a single state operator would still prefer that everything stays state operated. And I do think that that's kind of probably how things would look. Is that something you as a single state operator in California are sort of pro towards, or would you more be leaning towards the decriminalization and a state by state operation?
Well, a couple things. First, I don't think that full federal decriminalization is imminent. I think that it will come in stages. We'll see whether the sixth time is the charm for the Safe Banking Act. And I think, and I'm sure that you agree, that we're going to see incremental change till we finally get to full decriminalization. For us, we really believe that when we enter a market, we will win. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was in Colorado and I walked into a PacSun clothing store with my 14-year-old. And it hit me that there's no Nebraska Suns or Illinois Suns, right? We're just following a very well-worn path when we say, look, products that win in California and are successful in California will be successful in other states. And so, however federal legalization or decriminalization comes, whether it comes in fits and starts or all at once, we're ready for it, and we're excited for how that plays out.
Yeah, very much. I like that you mentioned the PAX clothing brand, because that's the number one vaporizer brand as well as PAX, and it comes from Southern California. So it does seem to be that California will continue to be sort of the starting point for anyone if they're looking at the cannabis space, and will probably be the benchmark for quite some time on a both national and international scale, it seems. I really appreciate the talk today, and I really appreciate the insight on California's market. I think you made a lot of really great points. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, anytime. Thanks a lot.
Once again, that was Steve Gutterman, the CEO of Falcon Brands. To find out more information about Falcon Brands, you can click the link attached in the article or visit their website at falconbrands.com. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.